Good evening, everybody. And a lot of what I would have told you tonight, I'm not going to say. We've been giving presentations across mainland China since I arrived here on June 5th. And we've spoken in Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and now here in Hong Kong. But this is the only event where we had the movie beforehand. And a lot of what I would have told you tonight was mentioned in the film. And so when I get to those slides, I'll just remind you of what happened in the film. And hopefully we'll get out of here before 10 o'clock. So. The reason we are giving these presentations is because we come out with 2 new publications. And I urge you all to go to the internet and download these publications for yourselves and get all the details. The first publication is The Case Against Marine Mammals in Captivity. And it was actually originally published in 1995. That's the original date when I first produced it, as an effort to pull together all of the arguments against what the industry often tells you when you visit these facilities. And back then, there wasn't as much science as there is today, because the industry actually controlled the narrative back then. And so what science there was either very, very underdeveloped, there just wasn't that much, or it was sort of propaganda science and it supported the industry. And it turns out that a lot of the things they should have been studying over all the years they've been holding whales and dolphins at that point, they had never done that science. They had never done those studies because they didn't want to know the answers. That's my firm belief. Because they knew that if they knew the answers, it wouldn't support their position. And I will discuss this a bit more later. So this is now going to be the 5th edition, but I'll mention that again in a moment. The second publication is the case, there you go, is the China Cetacean Alliance's 2nd edition of their report about the situation specifically in mainland China. So it's a much shorter report. The Case Against Marine Mammals in Captivity is about 160 pages, and the China Cetacean Alliance report's only about 40. But it is very specific to the situation in mainland China. So if you're interested in those details, then that's the one you should read. I'm going to skip over this because I think we need to move on. But I included a couple of slides of myself in the field just to prove to you I once was there. This is me with an elephant seal about 35 years ago. And this is me doing my research on orcas, or killer whales, as Tyson mentioned. So I spent all winter in the field with the elephant seals when I was at the University of California at Santa Cruz, and then all summer with the killer whales, or orcas, up in British Columbia in Canada. And my dissertation was on the social dynamics of male orcas, but my very first publication was on elephant seals and the behavior of males toward weaned pups. They are so highly sexualized during the breeding season that they basically mount weaned pups because they think they're females. It's pretty grim sometimes. And then I also studied males when I was studying the orcas, and I'm not sure if there's a trend there, or a theme. But anyway, I was very interested in the social structure of orcas, which is where males remain with their mothers for their whole life up there. And that's a very rare social structure in mammals, because when you think about it, no offense to the gentlemen in the audience, males can be very disruptive when they become sexually mature. And they are often pushed out of the social group in elephants and just about any other, the mammalian species you can think of. They're pushed out of the social group by their mothers when they become sexually mature and are extremely disruptive. And then they will often travel in bachelor groups, or they'll be solitary until the mating season. But interestingly, in orcas, they live with their mothers their whole life, and I was very interested in how do they deal with that, because they are still highly sexualized, they're larger than the females. Who's dominant? Well, it turns out the females are, the mothers are, but there are advantages to staying with your mother your whole life, and they don't mate with their mothers, they don't mate with their sisters, they don't mate with their aunts. They actually leave their mothers for brief periods of time to go mate with somebody else, and then they come back to the mother. And so there's a cost-benefit analysis that has obviously been done evolutionarily over time. And what the females get out of it, what the mothers get out of it, is a built-in babysitter. Adult males will babysit their younger siblings. And what the males get out of it is access to unrelated females with whom they can mate. And so it works. And I was very fascinated by all that, and I spent a lot of time with these animals in the wild studying that. And then I went to work for the Animal Protection Organization, where I worked for 20 years, the Humane Society of the United States. And then in 2013, I came to work for the Animal Welfare Institute. And my signature issue has been the welfare of captive. I work on whale watching, I work on whaling, I work on marine noise in the environment. But my signature issue has been this. And I started on day one when I left graduate school. And so for 26 years now, I have been examining what happens to these animals once they become captive. So as I mentioned, I wrote the first edition of this document, The Case Against Marine Mammals in Captivity, in 1995. And since then, we've done 4 more editions, about every 3 or 4 years, until the 4th edition, which, as you notice, was in 2009. So we went 10 years without producing a new edition. And it wasn't because nothing was happening. In fact, everything was happening in these past 10 years. And that's why we didn't produce a new edition. We did not have the time. There was too much going on on this issue after Tillicum killed his trainer at SeaWorld. Things just started moving at light speed, and we simply did not have the time to do a new edition. And so, just this year, I finally said, this has got to stop. We've got to produce a new edition, because there's been so much science done in the past 10 years, so much new information that supports our position and not the industry's position. And some of that research is actually coming from the industry. As I said, they did not want to do this research initially. We forced them to do it. You saw some of that in the film. You saw some of the pressure that they were under, that they had to start admitting to certain things. Oh yeah, we do capture them from the wild, and oh yeah, the capture process is really violent, and they had to start admitting to some of that. And so they actually stopped doing some of the things they used to do that they didn't think twice about, like capturing these animals from the wild. The industry in the West does not do that anymore because they can't escape the publicity when they do, right? Still here in the East, unfortunately, they are doing that. And as you saw from the film, a lot of the animals, in fact, pretty much all of the orcas and belugas that are in captivity in China are from Russia, from the wild. They're not really breeding them very successfully in captivity. All of the dolphins of various species are largely coming from Japan, right? So we stopped a couple of the worst practices in the West, but not yet in the East. And so what was interesting to me as I was dealing with this 5th edition is that a lot of the arguments that the industry makes are still the same. They still say, oh, we're essential for research. We're essential for conservation. We're essential for education. We have to be here. You saw some of that in the film. Oh, if we don't have belugas in captivity, the belugas are doomed. That's never been the way it works. They've been in captivity since the 1950s. And belugas are going down the tubes in a number of places. So obviously having them in captivity hasn't stopped any of that. And if you ask me, it's made it worse. I actually think the miseducation and the misinformation that these facilities share with their audiences has made it more difficult to do proper conservation. And some of that, again, was in the film. These people are capturing these animals from the wild in a way that actually harms the wild populations while they're claiming to be conservationists. There's nothing really wrong with that. So we continue to say, no, they are misleading people in terms of education. They are harming conservation efforts by continuing to capture them from the wild. And they are not doing the research they claim they've been doing. And when they do research, it actually supports our arguments more often than theirs. And so the whole purpose of this report, of this book, basically, is to pull all of those arguments together, summarize them, and present them to you. We meticulously document all of the sources we use. There's over 600 endnotes, most of which are references, so that you can go and find out for yourself. You don't have to listen to me. You can go out and find out for yourself where all of this information is coming from. So all I'm going to give you is some of the highlights from the book. So you saw that I was in the film. Tyson made a joke about that. Well, I was in it too, you know. So you know, we're not a big. All I'm going to give you is some of the highlights from the book. So you saw that I was in the film. Tyson made a joke about that. Well, I was in it too, you know. So you know, we're not a big community, and it turns out that most people who go to these facilities are not going there to learn anything. They're going there to be entertained. And if you ask them about it, they'll just say that. You know, they don't pay any attention to the signs. They don't pay any attention to, you know, the pre-show where they might actually learn a thing or two. They're just talking amongst themselves and they're not listening. And when they start to pay attention is when the show starts. And the show has almost nothing in it. And they don't care because they're not there to learn anything. They're there to be entertained. And so that was actually a big finding in a lot of studies, is that not only are they not learning anything, but they don't want to learn anything. That's not why they're going to these places. So what you really need to get into your head, I think, from the very start is that purpose. Oh, we're here to educate the public, and you heard it in the film. That's their, you know, that's why they exist, they claim. Nobody's fooled by that, which is actually a problem, because what they do learn, if they're paying even any attention at all to some of the things that they get told, it's often false, it's often wrong, it's often incorrect information. And I can tell you that a lot of people who leave a marine park, at the end of the day, they don't even know whales and dolphins are mammals. They didn't even learn that during their time at the facility. What this photo is me testifying in front of a U.S. Congress hearing. The committee that I was testifying in front of was the committee that's responsible for administering the Marine Mammal Protection Act in the United States. And after Don Brancho was killed, and that really made the news. I can't express to you historically how amazing it was, how focused the media was on this story for so long. And it was such a focus, it was so controversial when this trainer was killed at SeaWorld, that the U.S. Congress wanted to know what happened. And so they got this hearing, they put this hearing together, and C-SPAN covered it, which is actually a pretty big deal, because C-SPAN only covers the hearings that they think the public will want to watch. So they clearly believed that this was a controversial enough issue to air on their channel, on their network. And it was very interesting to me. The take-home message for me after that hearing was that the industry, particularly SeaWorld at the time, was not ready for the narrative to change. They were so used to being in the driver's seat. They were so used to everybody thinking of them as the experts, and everybody listening to them as the experts, and for them controlling the narrative, that when they were challenged by this congressional committee, they didn't have any good answers. They actually flailed around quite a bit and ended up looking kind of foolish. And that was sort of the start. This is in April of 2010. Don Brancho was killed in February of 2010. And so this started the whole thing. And then there was a book, and then there was a movie, Blackfish. Then there were some more movies, Born to be Free. And it just changed the whole narrative. And they are still not doing a very good job of keeping up with that. And all of that's explained in this chapter. Second chapter is about the research and conservation part of it. Remember, these are the three pillars upon which their justification for existing rests. We are important for research. We are important for education. We are important for conservation. So the reason I have these three photographs is they're all of the same animal. His name is Jadal. He was a bottlenose dolphin who was released from Korea. The reason I have him up here is because remember in the film when they said, we can't release these belugas from Utrecht, you know, the Georgia Aquarium was saying, oh, we can't do that, they'll die. These were wild-caught belugas who'd been in the captivity for only a couple of years, but we can't release them. They become too dependent on human beings, they'll die. Well, they always make that claim. Whenever we argue, oh, you should release some of these animals back into the wild, you should rehabilitate them and release them, they say, oh, that'd be like abandoning your dog in the woods. You know, they're like dogs. They would die. And in fact, this is true. So in some cases, that might happen. They might not be competent in the wild anymore because they've been living in a concrete box for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 20 years. And they may not be able to go back to the wild. But these dolphins in Korea, there were 5 of them. Judall was just one of them, and he's got the number 1 here because he was the first dolphin who was part of a lawsuit that nonprofit organizations brought against the facilities that were holding these 5 dolphins because they claimed, and it turned out they were right, that those captures were illegal in Korea, under Korean law. And so these 5 dolphins were caught in fishing nets. And you may remember the young trainer in Lev Mukhametov's St. Petersburg Dolphinarium. Did any of you notice that that St. Petersburg Dolphinarium was an Olympic swimming pool? Did y'all notice that? It was a human swimming pool. It was an Olympic training pool from the 1980 Moscow Olympics in St. Petersburg. It was meant to be a training pool for the Russian swimming team. It had the swimming lanes and the diving boards, and even had the Olympic rings on the back. Think about that. Belugas, bottlenose dolphins, walruses, did you see those? And sea lions, all living. They're from the temperate and polar water, so I don't know what temperature they keep the water at, but it's making somebody uncomfortable. Those animals are living in an Olympic swimming pool that is only a few meters deep, and they live in. I think it's only about 2.5 meters deep at the shallow end. And this is standard Olympic swimming pool stuff. And then at the deep end, it's about 7 meters deep. And they live in that their whole life. And you saw the conditions in the back. I just wanted to point that out because they didn't say that in the film. They didn't point that out, that it was an Olympic swimming pool, but you could see it. Anyway, these 5 dolphins have been illegally captured in fishing nets. They've been trapped in fishing nets. And remember the young trainer had said, oh, sometimes, we rescue these animals. They're caught in fishing nets and we're asked as an aquarium to come and rescue them. And that's how they acquire some of the animals. Well, that's how these 5 animals were acquired in Korea. But the law requires that if you're a fisherman and you find an entangled dolphin and it's alive, you have to release it. Cut your net and release it. Well, they didn't. They kept them and they sold them to 2 separate dolphinariums. 4 in one and Judall in another, right? And so Judall became the subject of a legal case to try to prove that those captures had been illegal. He had been at this facility for almost 5 years, about 4.5 years, and a couple of the other dolphins that had been illegal captured had been in their facility for up to 6 years. Concrete tanks, standard issue concrete tanks, and they've been in those tanks for 4 to 6 years. They lost. The industry lost the case. Okay? And so the court actually ordered them to return them to the wild. Now that could have been a bad thing. What if they couldn't be returned to the wild? What if they couldn't be rehabilitated and returned to the wild? Well, they could, because they were caught as adults. They were caught as adults in these nets. And they've only been in captivity 4 to 6 years. And if you ask me, and this is just my opinion, I think 10 years is getting to the point where they're going to start forgetting things. They're not going to remember everything they need to know. That's just my opinion. It's based on 26 years of watching these dolphins, some successfully released and some not successfully released. At 10 years, I think after that, they just start forgetting everything. But anyway, these guys had only been in captivity 4 to 6 years. They'd been adults when they were captured, and we knew exactly where to return them. There are dolphins that live around the island of Jeju in Korea, and that's where they were caught, and that's where they need to go back. So the upper left hand is, you see the tag that's on this dorsal fin? It's designed to eventually fall off, but while it's on, it allows you to track him precisely. You know exactly where he is all the time. But once it falls off, you want to be able to continue to track him and make sure he's still healthy and still thriving in the wild. So you put a freeze brand on him. This is not a hot brand. This is a freeze brand, and it's less painful, and it's permanent. Notice how the tag's gone, but the number remains. So anybody can report him. A fisherman, a recreational boater, anybody can say, oh, I saw Judall today, and I'm going to call the authorities and let them know. He was released in 2013. He is still alive today. There were 2 dolphins released in 2013, and there were 3 dolphins released, no, there's 3 dolphins released in 2013 and 2 dolphins released in 2015. All of them are still alive today. 2 of them were females, and they had given birth. All right, so not only did they go back to the wild, and he's still seeing this little number 1, and he was just last seen about 8 months ago, but they're thriving, they're giving birth. This scar, I'm not sure you can see it in this light, but this scar on his head, which is clearly the teeth of another dolphin, which he doesn't have here and he doesn't have there, is the kind of scratch that 2 males who are fighting over access to females might give each other. So he's breeding. So this was a completely successful release, but the industry claims you can't do this. Well, all the captive breeding that they're doing is only for conservation, which they claim it is, if you're going to return animals to the wild. If you're just breeding them to keep them in a concrete box, then that's just breeding them to display them. That's not conservation. So they can't have it both ways. Either they are for conservation, and their breeding programs are for conservation, which means they're going to release them to the wild, or you can't release them to the wild. Oh, that would kill them. You can't have it both ways. And that is very common of the industry. They do a lot of that illogical thing.